Good afternoon and welcome to Slow Art Friday. My name is Christy McMillan. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Asheville Art Museum. I'm joined by Shana Hill, a touring docent here at the museum who will be moderating today's program, as well as my colleague Paige Taylor, who will be helping me to moderate today. Each Friday at 12 p.m. while the museum I was going to say while the museum is closed, but we're not closed anymore. Each Friday at 12 p.m., docents lead virtual interactive conversations about a few artworks in our collection or special exhibitions. The goal is simple: slow down, discover the joy of looking at art, and talk about the experience with others. For today's program, Shauna will lead us in an interactive conversation about three works in our collection. We'll spend about 15 minutes or so with each one. Shauna will allow us time to look at each work on our own, slowly, before leading a conversation with questions. As participants, we encourage you to engage in dialogue with Shauna, Paige, myself, and each other throughout the hour. Few housekeeping items before we get started. You probably noticed as you were getting logged on that your microphone and video were muted by default. We do invite you to turn on your video so that we can have a conversation with faces instead of pictures and names. And in just a moment, I will make it so that you can unmute your microphone as well. Choose a quiet room and close the door. Silence any alerts from nearby devices as they can be very distracting during the conversation. If you do turn on your video, try not to sit in front of a window, lamp, or other strong source of light or movement, as it can make it distracting. Use headphones and microphone for best sound quality. While you can log on using a smartphone, we do recommend using a desktop, laptop, or tablet to see slides and meeting tools on a larger screen. Make sure that your screen name includes your first name and last initial, or first name and last name, so that we know who we're talking to during the hour. In order to ask questions or make comments, we do encourage you just to unmute your microphone when Shauna asks for questions or comments. Please leave your microphone turned off if you're not actively asking a question or making a comment. Type into the chat box as a second way to participate today. A third way is to raise your hand in the participant sidebar, and I will call on you and ask you to unmute your microphone. Sometimes it can take a while to get to those hands, so please do choose method 1 or 2. Just unmute yourself and talk, or type into the chat box in order to participate today. Finally, we are recording, so if you prefer not to be recorded, make sure that your video and audio remain muted and use the chat box to submit any questions or comments. At this time, I'm going to make it so that folks can unmute themselves. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? All right, Shauna, what are we going to be talking about today?
Fridays. I do see, am I unmuted? Yes, okay. Thank you. I do see a lot of returning people and some new faces. That doesn't mean that you haven't participated before. That just means that I wasn't in that Slow Art Friday. Anyway, welcome. Today our theme is observation or hidden message. I selected 3 works of art from our collection that have interesting, which I believe have some interesting features about them. And I'm hoping now that we can begin to look at our first work of art. And we'll take a few minutes or a couple of minutes to look at it. And then in a minute or so, we will start discussing it. But take a minute, look top to bottom, right to left, and up and down. So what do you see in this work of art? Yes.
I see some young women, some younger girls, and next to them some older ones, as if they are having an outing at some kind of an arcade or something that might be comparable to what we know of today as sort of video arcades. But they're on an outing, and it's an interesting perspective because we see mostly the backs of all the girls that are, and the young women who are very engaged in what they're doing, with the exception of one who happens to have turned around and kind of glanced at us. And it feels like momentarily she might just turn around and go back to what she was doing before. But so there's a lot to this, including 1-cent fortunes, things that cost a penny. So that would let you know, of course, that these are a long time ago. Anyway, I think I liked it. I think it was very engaging, and you could tell a lot of stories about this one particular
Great.
photograph, I guess.
That's what we like about these, is to tell the stories. So these are girls older and younger that are on an outing at an arcade. Christina, what makes you think they're young and old? Why
Well,
do you say young and older?
because the girls to the far right have shorter skirts on and straw hats, and they're dressed. I just noticed that by their, I don't know, I just noticed that by their dress, whereas the young women to the left have long skirts on and sort of the attire that slightly older would be a more appropriate in those days. If this, I'm not sure what decade this is, but maybe the early 1900s. And obviously it was not appropriate for them to be wearing short dresses and short skirts.
So the attire is kind of what got you there. Yes, we have a couple of comments. Barbara or Analia?
I really like this one. And yes, of course, it's an old style arcade. I think what really got me is on the first couple of glances, that's the kind of information I got. But it was in looking more at it, the verbiage on the first two, girls in their nightgowns and the naughty girls. That had just gone right past me. And in some ways, this is early softcore porn, which is just hysterical to me. You know, right next to the sort of marionette, your fortune. And now I get a different sense of, you know, the girl who turned and them sort of like laughing and hanging out together. This is, you know, stuff that they maybe shouldn't be doing.
Exactly.
I just really, I think it's a great piece.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. I noticed the girls and, you know, I had a feeling, you know, they're where they're not supposed to be for this time and this age. I think the three girls in long skirts are still pretty young. I would suspect they were, you know, probably no older than 15 or 16. They still have the pigtail down the back and the bows. And if you've ever seen Anne of Green Gables, that's how she wore her hair when she turned 12 and had to go into long skirts, but she still wore her hair in a pigtail down the back out of short skirts. But I definitely got the feel that they were where they really probably shouldn't be.
So what can you tell us about their expressions of these?
I think they're having a very good time.
I think they're like a little giddy, and it's sort of like a penny arcade, but because the fortune's only 1 cent and they're all wearing hats, it is a long time ago. But can we possibly read the words on the right above the girl with the hat? If we could zoom in to see here. As we saw the fortune, yes, there's
Oh.
words there too. I can't fully read, but I'm assuming it's a similar.
So this one
genre.
says, trying on her stocking.
Ooh.
This one says, why she didn't, and it kind of looks like scratch.
Okay.
And this one says, but she didn't. So they're all obscured. You don't get the
Full.
you
Let's
don't get the
translate.
full like titillating what was on the language on the but it's kind of giving you a hint of maybe what that content was.
So turn of the century, you said early 1900s, and I also heard, I haven't finished Anne of Green Gables, but said that at 12 they have to pull their hair back and start wearing longer dresses. So that's a great observation. So, and someone in the chat box said because the younger girls are standing on a stool. Anything else from the chat box that we've missed? Paige? No? Okay, great. Well, let's go look at this one and see what it is about. Next slide. So this is called Fun 1 Cent by John Sloan, 1905. So that's really good indication. And it's small, 4 3/4 by 6 7/8. So John Sloan was born in 1871 in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, and he moved to Philadelphia at 5 and with his parents, but he left high school at 16 to support his family. He worked in bookstores and print shops. And while there, he experimented with pen and ink and taught himself etching. That's got to be hard. He spent time copying Dürer and Rembrandt in his spare time from the books. And he designed greeting cards. This eventually led him to a job in an art department of the Philadelphia Inquirer, and then later to the Philadelphia Press. He worked as an illustrator, and during this time he attended evening classes at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, where he met Robert Henry. I think we have some Robert Henry in the collection or in this special exhibit. He followed Robert Henry to New York in 1904. So this was probably done in the New York area since it's 1905. He is best known for his scenes of the city life, sympathetic but unsentimental depictions of urban life and the working class expressed his commitment to social reform. He was part of the 8 that later were coined the Ashcan School. He didn't sell his first painting until 1913, which is after this. He earned a living as a commercial artist for the newspapers and magazine until 1916. And then he was hired as an art instructor for the Art Students League, and some of his students were Alexander Calder, Adolf Gottlieb, and Barnett Newman. He never traveled abroad. He wanted to create an art that captured the American spirit, much like Whitman's poetry did. Are there any hidden meanings or observations? Anyone?
Would you like for me to go back to the artwork?
Sure.
I think given what you just told us, you said that he wanted to capture the life of working classes, but social reform. So I'm wondering, given that sort of piece of his bio, if he was actually critiquing sort of the availability of maybe morally questionable content and who might be consuming it. You know, is it adults, probably adult men, or is it younger women who could be corrupted by it?
Right.
Maybe.
I was thinking something along that line too, with when Shana mentioned that, in that sometimes just showing an image of something that is considered socially taboo can help to normalize it. So perhaps there's an attempt to show women in this situation and make it less of a stigma for women to engage in this kind of behavior. I don't know.
Well,
I like, oh, go ahead.
what,
Billy, go ahead.
the Ashcan School really focused on depicting reality in real life. And during that period of time, up until that period of time, as I understand it, the depiction of particularly New York, but of women and people in general had been romanticized, glamorized. And so Bellows and Sloan and the rest of the Ashcan School went into the what they saw as the underbelly of New York, I believe, and began depicting and really revealing what real life was going on. You know, Bellows did the fight scenes that were in the boxers. Sloan did, I love this. This is a great piece. I haven't seen this piece before. So, but that really was my understanding. The point of the Ashcan School was to bring about an appreciation for the reality of life and lifestyles in New York that weren't necessarily glamorous.
Yes, I totally agree. And in this case, both what Paige and Christy contributed is that there is probably, because he was an illustrator, there probably was a lot of observation, as you mentioned as well, Billy, but there also could be some hidden meaning of why he chose to illustrate this. Because it didn't say one way or the other whether it is an assignment for the newspaper or magazine. In this one, yeah. But his observation of what was happening in the world at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Yes, Barbara.
I would just also add that I love the depiction of the machines. That even in, I don't know, the late 50s, early 60s, I remember some of these vintage machines being around. I certainly didn't see them with those kind of titles or content. But I just love this as not just what we're talking about, the girls and everyday life and what that means, but just such a great period piece. That is a part of our history. And somebody else said, you know, how it might, you know, go in a sequence of what arcade games look like now.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add that because I just love that.
I agree. And I've been to arcade places in my youth that they had things like this where you cranked a handle or put in a penny and got to see the cards flashing by or the reel flashing by. Not sure, I think the museum featured this one a couple of weeks ago, and we weren't sure whether it was a kinescope or a mutoscope, I think is the other one, but they were both in the same time frame, early motion pictures. So,
Shana, did you see
yes.
girls in nightgowns?
Yes, and that, yes, he referred to.
No, did you? When you were seeing these, did you have the opportunity to see girls in nightgowns? I'm just kidding.
I saw what seemed to be racy at all. Of course, at that time it wouldn't have been racy. I think.
Not in the 60s.
So I think we need to go to our next work of art, Christy, and spend some time looking at it, top to bottom, left to right, diagonally as well. Okay, anybody want to begin?
The shapes
What do
of
you
the
see?
buildings are very interesting with the one building with the texture and the way there's not the pointy one, not the ones with the windows, but the middle building, if you will. Just very interesting with the shadowing and the texture and the sky. And I was going to say the figures are a little hard to discern, but it looks as if in the middle there's a man walking like with a sandwich board, almost like he's wearing a sign on his back. Yes. And there's looks like a little boy maybe selling a newspaper. So that's intriguing.
A lot of detail here. So what do you think is going on? What's happening? Christina? Oh, you're unmuted. You're muted.
When I first looked at this, you know, I felt like I had seen this before somewhere, because so often in my travels, or if you're in cities, whether it be in the United States or cities in Europe, nowadays although I know this was not painted, I mean, this was not done recently. I think it dates back to the 1930s, but the contrast of the new and the old, and always the dilemma of, obviously this is a beautiful church of some, and I'm guessing of some historical importance that could not be torn down, and yet progress had to go forth with this depiction of this extremely modern building in the middle, and then the skyscraper sort of on the left and tall buildings on the right, lot more uninteresting, just rectangular. And so I don't know, to me, it drew me in because I feel like I've seen this in so many, not this particular depiction, but I've seen this in cities before, of the new and the old side by side. I don't know if that has some significance. But then there are a lot of people on the street in front, and I'm not sure if that's they're demonstrating in some way, or it's simply a busy city street at a particular time of day when people are walking by. I can't read what's on that board that this man.
Can you zoom in on the people again, Christy? Thank you.
It's hard to say. It's very small. I feel like this word is salon. This could be donut. This could say 89 cents. I'm not 100% sure. It's not very crisp, even on my screen.
Well, what can we?
Donut salon, 89 cents,
what can
maybe?
we?
Or 89th, like 89th Street. I'm not sure.
What can we say about the people? Anybody want to comment just on what we're seeing in the pedestrians here?
Representing all different types of people. You have the man that looks like Mr. Monopoly right there by the
What else, Sally?
And then you have the flower seller. It looks like a woman with flowers.
Mm-hmm.
I found the people, they have no real features, distinguishable features, perhaps, except maybe two of them. The woman with maybe a fur on her by the sign, woman by the sign.
In front of the sign, yeah, there.
No, this one. Yeah, that one. And this gentleman over here beside the guy with the cane, that one. His features are, both of those have features. The others are pretty featureless. I also agree with this. I've seen this in Europe, maybe not with the tall skyscraper in the back, which is very bright. And, you know, the sky almost looks like there's lightning. I found this very interesting. The cars, they're definitely 30s or 40s. I don't know where this was depicting. Pre-war Europe, pre-World War II. I don't know.
Oh, English.
But
Looks like English.
So what about a hidden meaning or observation?
I feel the church is dark and it almost looks a little bit creepy, and the building in white is very straight and up high. It's lit up, and I almost feel like the church is dying and capitalism is taking over, and the sky is not peaceful to me.
No,
the way
it's
it's
not.
drawn, patchwork, I almost feel like there's kind of judgment coming down, or something's not right in the world because the church is dying and capitalism or whatever, or big corporations are taking over, and so the people are kind of becoming not distinct. You're not recognizing them as individuals.
Yes,
It's
Barbara.
an angry sky.
Terry?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Barbara and then Terry. Thanks.
I see it certainly as a period piece, although you say that they're not distinguishable. They're hats, all of the hats and the costumes and the cars. And then we all go to what is our next level of interpretation. And mine is just that this, to me, feels very science fiction. You know, that
Oh, yeah. That's
period piece, and then there's this white structure, you know, of a different era, and just how different the piece would be, obviously, if that wasn't there.
great. Yeah, Sandy, or well, Terry, did you want to say something about it?
I think I was just going to echo what Charlotte and maybe some others had said. I definitely see this contrast of the light and dark, meaning the church, or this dark structure that happens to be a church, or maybe it's purposefully a church. Maybe it's an indication of what's behind us, and this new technology of sorts that's light and bright that appears to be our future. The people seem to be secondary in the figure, almost like little ants that you know, and I see this motion with them, and they seem to help indicate how these architectural structures have transitioned over hundreds of years. We can almost look at each structure, which somebody already pointed out, but you could almost look at each structure and see periods of time.
You have, you have a progress of architectural style that starts with the church, which is very Gothic. And one of the purposes of the Gothic architecture was to draw the eye up into the heavens to God. And so that's what I see in the forefront. And then I see a progression of architectural style, culminating in the center with the Art Deco design of the skyscraper. And so I love the observation that the people, the figures, are really diminished by all of the architecture. But the objective seems to be, to my eye, to continue to go up. And so the progression of architecture is what I see.
In our chat box, Micah Jean also mentioned the Art Deco look of the modern building, and Diane said that the church looks like Trinity Church to her on Wall Street in New York, I'm assuming, Diane.
Sandy, you had a comment before, a couple of comments before that. Did you still have something to say?
Oh, it was on the last piece.
Oh, okay, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Well, let me pose this question, since you said that the people were almost secondary. What would it be any different if the people weren't there? You think we get the same message?
You know, once again, the docent question, if you were in this environment, what would you hear?
No,
Well,
I
there's
like that
a
one, Jill.
cacophony of noise going on there in my mind. But if you took the figures away, it would have an entirely different feel, and you wouldn't hear anything.
So what would we hear in this one? Going back to that question, what are the sounds that we might hear?
Hustle, bustle, motion. I don't see a pet, but I see a little kid. So I think there would be a lot of
Noise.
communication. Yeah, a lot of noise.
Car horns.
Yeah, car horns.
Car horns.
Yeah, great.
And
So
you'd hear the hawking of I'm sure the flower woman and the little boy with the newspaper trying to sell them and trying to get customers. So
this is Micah, and I just wanted to echo what Diane had put in the chat box. But her last sentence, that's possible to say how much commercialism overshadows our connection to religion. I thought that was really interesting.
I was going to say, along the same theme, I see this as religion and, as you say, going up towards God being replaced by a new God in the new capitalism or whatever the new skyscraper represents, being taller. I found this sort of dystopian. Maybe that's.
But throughout the time, think of the centuries that Gothic architecture has prevailed.
Right.
And so among all of this, you still have that church prevailing, and this work was done before 9/11, but that church prevailed through 9/11 as well. And so I guess I see, rather than dystopian, I see a continuation and the solidity of that Gothic architecture, despite the development that's going on around it.
That's an interesting point too. That it shows that it's not overshadowing, but it's grounding. It's always going to be there.
No one's going into the church that we can see. They're all going somewhere else.
If you look at the top of the steeple, there's a cross. And if you look at the layers of the building, there's kind of a cross there. So that, to me, goes back to the building taking over, being the new religion.
That's what I think.
Interesting observation, Charlotte. I like that. Well, do you want to know a little bit more about the artist?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, this is someone that I had not heard about before, but the title is Man and His Monuments. Carlos Anderson, 1935. So I think we have captured the time frame. And actually, Carlos Anderson, who I had not known before, was born in Utah in 1905. He's a painter, illustrator, and a WPA artist. Studied at the University of Utah, the Art Students League in New York City, the École des, I always get this off, Beaux-Arts in Paris, and also the Académie Julian in Paris. So this is a very well-educated artist. He received a commission to record early life in Utah. 24 sketches as a part of the WPA. They were primarily historical buildings. These drawings are still owned by the state of Utah and known as the WPA collection. He moved to New York and painted in the American scene style, a stylized form of realism. So he went from capturing exact what things look like to going into a stylized form of realism. He moved to California in the 40s, and he was associated with the San Francisco Civic Center and later drew illustrations for the Oakland Army Base. And after the war, he began with Abbott Laboratories and had commissions to depict medical subjects and at stateside naval hospitals. He had a career of 20 years as a graphic artist, and he died 1978 in Salt Lake City. So he had quite a varied career. But I really liked our discussion on the hidden meaning or observation. You might go out and Google him. I really found a lot of his earlier works in Utah and architecture. Most everything that I saw was architecture related, and this is in great contrast to some of his earlier work as far as the stylized, I think. So any other comments after you knew that or heard of it? You might have heard of it before. Okay, Christy, let's go to the next one. Let's take a few minutes to look at it and we'll discuss it. Okay, anyone want to start with this one? What are you seeing?
This is Micah. I actually have hardly even looked at the center piece. I've been more fascinated by the frame, or I guess it's part of the piece, but I've been deciphering what's on what looks like a frame.
Well, can we zoom in on that? Christy, the frame, and maybe you can share what you're seeing.
It's a yardstick.
What brought your eyes to that over other? What can you say about it?
You're asking me. That's where my eyes went.
That's where your eyes went. Okay.
That's just what happened.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Let's go back and look at the rest. Laurel, did you?
I can't make out the words. It looks on the bottom above the frame. It might say 4 serves, 4 selves, 4 serves.
Looks
maybe.
like it says 4 fives.
It's yeah, 4 fives. And it isn't the frame is a yardsticks. Like yardstick. They used to give away. They don't give them away now, but they were used as advertisement back when we were all kids.
But it looks like 2 hands to me, made out of forks and knives. And sort of serving pieces. Colors are intriguing too.
So
right, my first title was from Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
You know, yes, I like Laurel. I see forks and knives and hands, but I haven't figured out for me how it goes with the grid background and the yardsticks and
Anybody
the images within the background.
Have any
and then look at the
shadows.
Look at the shadows.
It's
well, the grid is 8 by 10, so 4 by 5, if that means anything.
The sign, I mean, at the bottom it says 4 selves. So at least that's what I see, SELVES, and the shadow, it almost makes you think of double. Because it looks like it could be more than one set of hands, but that still doesn't equal 4 selves. I'm not sure. And then the background, I don't know what this is made of, but it looks like watercolor that has just been made to look like shadow or some kind of leafy, mysterious background. I love the colors of it. It's very the green and the I don't know what I'm saying, but it's just one of the most intriguing pieces. And I'm not sure what I'm looking at, which other people have said too, of course.
The colors, Christina, is why I selected it. Sandy, did you have a comment on it?
I love the green, that shade of green, and then how the background is shaded in all different muted colors that sort of go along with that sort of greenish tone. I don't know what that means, but it attracted me a lot.
I see some very industrial, hard hands creating something, the shadow, something very delicate. And as you all talk about the color, I'm starting to see that more as a vegetable or something from that perspective, that maybe these industrial hands can create something beautiful or fruitful.
I'm reading 4s/5s, and so it's like you have 4 fingers but 5 digits on a hand, or if you look at the spaces where the like knife part is put in, there are 4 black spaces where they inserted something, but they're 5 tines of the fork. So I'm seeing a play on 4s and 5s.
That's interesting. I was trying to find out or determine myself whether there was what the 4s and 5s were about. I Googled myself to death, couldn't find anything, but that sounds really representative of what now that you've mentioned that, is that it's talking about the pairing or the numbers, how they go together. Anybody see any resemblance or Terry, you mentioned a vegetable. I immediately was thinking of a claw that you dig in the earth, and that instead of clawing with a mechanical tool, that your hands are the earthen claw. That was me.
I like that, because then what's behind it to me looks like a flower or leaves or something.
Oh,
So,
the shadow?
Yeah, the shadow.
Okay.
Also, it could be someone with their hands in front of the light, purposely making a shadow, like we do make rabbits or whatever, by putting your hands in a certain way so that it gives an image.
And Sandy just said it's a play on forks and knives, 4s and 5s. I like that from the chat box. Sandy, did you care to elaborate on that one?
Well, I was just thinking that I think that would be a clever play. 4s for
Yes.
forks, 5s, knives. I just think that was very clever, and it actually makes me like it a lot more.
Okay, so we want to know more about the artist? Or do we have any other things that we want to talk about in the comment? Okay, here we go. Robert Cummings, 1987. 27 by 35 is larger than the others. Robert Cummings was born in 1943 in Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm not an Easterner yet. American painter, sculptor, photographer, and printmaker. Best known for photographs of conceptual drawings and constructions, which layer meanings within meanings and reference both science and art history. What do you see that might reference science or art history in this piece? Anything?
Well, the lines of the graph do remind me of Leonardo da Vinci.
Oh, okay.
Or just graph paper in general.
Yeah.
Which, most of us, I think, don't really use outside of a planning or architectural or mathematical context. We used it maybe at school.
8 boxes on side, 10 boxes on top. Yes.
And interestingly enough, the Ashcan school artists used the grid a lot. George Bellows really promoted that. So that ties right back to the John Sloan piece that we looked at.
Mm-hmm.
That's
So
an interesting point,
Yeah.
Billy. Sort of a history of artists since the Renaissance using or underlying a grid onto their artworks in order to work out sort of convincing perspective to your eye.
Right.
So this is just my observation. I didn't find it anywhere. The science part about it, to me, these hands looked a little bit like the skeleton hands, if the hands were in a skeleton. And then as far as art history, the most thing that came to my mind was the praying hands that have been depicted through art history. Most every, well, not most every, that's pretty general. A lot of artists did praying hands. That's me, only me. So
Sally also mentioned in the chat box that Duper looked through or used the grid when drawing as well.
Oh, great.
That's a typo. I was trying to say Dürer.
Yes.
There's a drawing of, or an etching of him drawing a woman, and he's looking through a string grid to draw her to get the perspective correct.
Or I also am thinking about maybe Baroque artists or Renaissance artists using help me, Paige. I was going to say chiaroscuro, but that's the wrong word.
Shadow box?
Yeah, it's like the box camera obscura. Thank you, Paige. I can see it in my mind. But that, you know, had sort of a grid imposed on the surface and would turn everything upside down, allowing the artist to, you know, look at what a scene, a three-dimensional scene looked at like on a two-dimensional plane in order to better represent it in their artwork.
Interestingly enough, Robert Cummings did use something very close to camera obscura. He used an 8x10 camera in his photography works. So I don't know why I said that other than the camera obscura, but he, in his photography, he started out with the big cameras and then whittled down to, you know, I would say like just a regular 35mm type camera. He had a BFA from Massachusetts College of Art and MFA in painting from the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. He taught at the university for 3 years while showing his sculpture and painting through the Midwest. He engaged in mail art, had not heard of mail art before, shipping tree branches and dry cleaning tissue, as well as homemade and store-bought postcards to friends and strangers. In 1970, he moved to Southern California to explore the exploding art world in Los Angeles and to focus on photography. He produced 6 artist books. 3 were a trilogy in what he deliberately confused text, caption, and image. In 78, he returned to the East Coast and began to focus on painting and sculpture and other works on paper. In 1980, he turned to color, a smaller film format, and larger prints. And I think that in this 1987, this kind of included that where he began to do these kinds of things. In his non-photographic work, he reinvented motifs from his earlier practice, such as spools of thread and watermelons, and he was driven more by form and aesthetic than perceptual mechanics. These works are enigmatic and open for interpretation rather than puzzle the viewer, rather than a puzzle the viewer can solve. So I kind of got from this that he wanted this to be challenging for us, and we may not even understand why or what it was. That's my interpretation. In 1987, he did a series of mechanicals on graph-like paper, and some of them were nuts, bolts, heads, and threads. They were all very, very mechanical. So I encourage you to look at his 1987 works on Google. And he has one that's very similar to this. Could have been a precursor to that, or just another version of this one. So any other comments based on what I just said about him? Observation or hidden meaning?
I'm just noticing the size of this print. It's 27 3/4 by 35 1/2, which means that the rulers, it's the actual imprint of the rulers.
Oh,
It's not something that he's created. It's, you know, he's cut the rulers and probably applied some sort of crayon to them and pressed them down onto the lithographic plate in order to make them into the frame, if that makes sense. So he left the imprint of the actual rulers, and you know, the measurements and the writing on the rulers would have been sort of engraved into that wooden surface. So then would have been able to leave the imprint.
love it. Interesting, yes.
So it's both something that he's printed onto the printing plate to then reprint, but then something that he's created himself within the frame. It's really just an interesting sort of play with materials.
And then apply the watercolor, I'm assuming, or would that have come across on the lithograph, do you think?
Some sort of paint that would repel the ink. So maybe a more of a, could have been a watercolor that he had mixed some sort of oily substance into.
Great. Anyone else have any comments about this or the other two? Well, I thank you all for, I didn't have that much to say. You guys described it all. I really appreciate and was excited about what you had to offer today. As always, I learn more from these than I do in my research from what you guys are saying. So, Christy, you want to talk about next week?
Yeah. Thank you, Shana, for leading today's discussion. I was especially excited about the third one because that's one that I haven't spent a lot of time with. So I was really glad to have everyone's feedback and observations in order to make sense of it. It's really beautiful aesthetically, but it's really nice to think about the hidden meaning of that artwork. So thank you all for coming. It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Shana, for choosing these 3 artworks and for leading the discussion today. Next Friday is February, if you can believe it, February 5th. At noon, our touring docent, Kathy Seguin, has chosen 3 artworks, all very different artworks, a work on paper, a quilt, and a painting. And her theme is Threads of History, Cut, Sewn, and Pressed. I think it's really interesting the way that she's chosen these 3 different artworks and found a common theme in them, which may be obvious or may not be obvious. So join us next Friday for that discussion. When Paige sends the eval for today, she'll include the link for next week. I'll also be sending here in about 5 minutes an email with the 4 topics for the month of February. If you'd like to see what's coming up and get signed up in advance for some of our Slow Art Fridays in February, it would be a great opportunity to do so. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Take care. Enjoy the sunshine today.
Stay warm.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.